Combo decks have to be the most frustrating thing to ever play against. Your opponent just sits there looping 1 to 3 cards to a sometimes non-deterministic win while you sit there and regret all of your life decisions. But in today's video, I'm going to go over a post by someone talking about their frustrating experience against 2 specific decks newer into the Pauper format, talking about how they should answer these said decks. And I wanted to go over the concept of engines in Pauper, the general catch-alls that actually do exist in the format and do pull double duty, and how Pauper generally is a format where all decks can answer all other decks. Some answers are going to be more powerful than others, but the idea of engines and the basis for how you brew your deck are really going to be the key to winning all matchups. Am I just bad at the game? Old player from 90s and 2000s coming back into the game after a 20-something year hiatus. Well, welcome back. I'm not interested in the treadmill of Standard, and a friend suggested Pauper. I've been to a couple of game nights for Pauper and they went fine. Just last night did not. Match 1 was against High Tide combo. Giga Drouse was effectively uncounterable, so around turn 5 or so, my opponent taps all my lands. I get to spend 45 minutes watching him twiddle his islands while looking for a stream of thought to finish the game. I had no reasonable answer in my sideboard, so I simply conceded game 2. Now, there's a couple of things here. Giga Drouse is a very powerful card. It is one of the more common anti-aggro tools in the deck, but also I see some flags in here where they're talking about, so around turn 5, which is actually pretty late for this deck. So it kind of tells me that they had a lot of time. The deck doesn't actually have like main board counterspell or anything like that. So again, just highlighting how there are some flags in here and some opportunity points you had to answer this. Match 2 was against Cycle Storm, and actually, in my opinion, as a Cycle Storm player and a relatively easy deck to answer, he won on turn 2 while I had a single land on board, which is insane, by the way. Like, usually Cycle Storm decks, the earliest they're going off is probably like turn 3, turn 4. You want a consistent board, fill your graveyard up a little bit, and then you want to generate a storm count. Game 2, I boarded in some graveyard hate, and he won on turn 3 through a counterspell and graveyard exile, which is very, okay, possible, but very hard for me to believe. I think we're just highlighting the nuts here. Like, if this truly happened, I think opponent had the absolute nuts, and I still kind of don't believe it. Like, winning through a counterspell and graveyard exile, as we're going to highlight, kind of goes to show that one or both of those things happen at the wrong time. So it might just be threat evaluation. Both times I spent half an hour watching him cycle through all his cards and recycle. What is the counterplay against these win on the stack decks? Don't know what that means, but I mean, all decks win on the stack in some way. I'm assuming talking about decks that can win at instant speed or like react to some of the cards that it plays to create weird interactions. If this is the meta, I'm never going to play in this format. This was the most boring way I've ever spent my night off. I'd rather have stayed at home and done yard work. Please help. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is kind of a larger issue with like gaming in general, and how like you can't enjoy anything these days because there's too many sweats, and how like the average person that does like housework and chores and does their 9 to 5 can't spend all their time just like learning a metagame and everything. But this is not representation of a metagame. I would hope the person actually did their due diligence and maybe went around other decks at the game night and saw there was a variety and they got matched up. But you know what? Everyone's different experience. So they actually commented down below. They said, you know, what deck are you on? They're saying, I was running a janky Prodigal Sorcerer Brew, not a meta deck. I can see how a more efficient, i.e. meta deck would have helped in a High Tide matchup, but I literally cannot see the counter play against the Cycle Storm deck. So Pauper is a great format with a lot of room for innovation, but off meta decks can win tournaments, but janky brews are going to lose 90% of games. My advice is to net deck until you understand the format. You know, I don't play much against Cycle Storm, but almost no deck in Pauper wins consistently by turn. They said turn 3 here, but OP said turn 2. It's possibly they were just very lucky and you weren't interacting with them enough. So that's what I want to highlight in today's video. Go over what is the general basis for brewing and innovating in Pauper, and then honestly, just with my own format experience, go over how to answer these decks. There's a lot of non-interactiveness happening in the Pauper format right now, and even the recent BNR announcement addressed this through Gavin Verhey, talking about they are watching the play rates of something like the High Tide deck and how the ban was unban was successful when it came to High Tide in that it reintroduced a combo deck, and it may not be winning the majority of the games. It is a tier deck. It's not necessarily like tier 1. It might be 1.5, it might be 2, but the play pattern against it is really what's frustrating for people. And so if it has to be like an eggs-like ban, where eggs combo can be pretty frustrating to play against, where you have these long, sometimes non-deterministic play patterns to even get to a win, it can be very frustrating again to play against and have to deal with that. So they might even ban this deck again, just out of pure play pattern situation. So let's go over the decks themselves. When it comes to the Pauper metagame, there's a lot of variety when it comes to what you can play. Pauper is really diverse in my opinion, especially if the top of the format right now is a control deck. The second most played deck is a mid-range deck. Then the third is a combo deck, then a burn deck, then another completely different combo deck. Mid-range control, another type of burn deck, affinity at the top, elves, you know, go wide aggro, Tron, big mana. Like, the format is really diverse. Like, Pauper is one of the best formats in Magic right now in terms of diversity, in terms of interaction, in terms of play. One of the more common high level critiques I've seen of this format is that it's a little too interactive sometimes. Like, you are piecemealing your opponent a lot of times. Like, Pauper is about incremental value and leveraging that value to long-term wins, but you can just get interacted with and board states can get reset. Like, Pauper is a very grindy format in a lot of ways because there are a lot of answers to every deck in every archetype. So let's highlight that through something like engines. Now, this article was actually more recently updated, February 13th, but there are some outdated aspects to it. But I really want to highlight this because it's one of my favorite Pauper articles. And shout out to Alex Ullman of the Pauper format panel, one of the greats that play Pauper right now. Even though some aspects of this article are outdated, it really goes to highlight, you know, the engines in Pauper and how Pauper is dominated by groups of cards creating value in the rest of the package. So notably, if you look at the, you know, back here, the combo package largely has been Dark Rituals and Lotus Petals. It has been ritual effects and some amount of like Lotus Petals. Lotus Petal is very key in a lot of these decks. High Tide is like very unique in that aspect, and even Walls combo, but largely that's like one engine. Tron and the big mana package can be considered one as well. When it comes to affinity, the Artifact engine has been largely popular for a very long time, very controversial in its power level. When it comes to Drown Wildfires, the Wildfire Indestructible Artifact engine is also one to create a ramp package that also can interact with your opponent's lands. Blue Terror has largely been dominated by counter magic, brainstorms, the blue package to then create a threat. You have a similar package in Fairies, whereas in Blue Terror, you're playing like 1 to 2 mana 5/5s, like just really cheap, resilient, like big threats. Or in Mono Blue Fairies, you're playing a tempo aspect of something like Spellstarter Sprites and returning Spellstarter Sprite, your counterspell, with like Ninja the Deep Hours. And so that's like your kind of engine there. So a couple of different combination of cards really go the long way to support packages that can kind of go the mile when it comes to winning the game. You play a package, an engine, and you support that with other cards around it. And I think what happened here is that OP built a deck that wasn't centralized around one of these engines, or just like not one of these like packages that really presents like a win condition. Like if you break it apart, there are still a lot of like really powerful combo, like not even combo, like a lot of really powerful decks. Like Ephemeratron is different from something like regular Tron here, right? This is like Black Doll Tron that deals damage to artifacts, but there are different versions of Tron. You could play Dimir Control, which is a variation on Blue Terror, which you play Dimir largely for like removal packages and duress. You have a graveyard, purely graveyard based deck here in Dredge, Bogles, Caw Gates, which is like a control go wide strategy, mono white aggro, Walls combo, as I just mentioned. Boros Synthesizer used to be the more popular mid-range deck of choice before the kind of Deadly Dispute packages started getting popularized. And even then, that's a whole other package. Like 2 mana black spells that sacrifice a permanent and draw cards alongside Ichor Wellspring, tale as old as time when it comes to Pauper. So a lot of packages that come together that you can use as a basis to then build out into your Prodigal Sorcerer build. Like, should your Prodigal Sorcerer build have been more of a combo deck? Should it have been more of a control deck that tried to like hone in on a specific combo? Like, what are you trying to do with Prodigal Sorcerer? Are you trying to win over time by tapping a bunch of 3 mana dorks? That's not going to get there anyway, right? That's not going to get there in almost any format. Even as a format as diverse as this, you might be able to do something similar. You might be able to get the feel of what you wanted out of that and still be able to compete at a high level. Now, when it comes to breaking down the Pauper metagame itself, let's start with High Tide combo. How to beat High Tide combo. So This deck, mono blue, the whole point of this deck is that you're going to draw through your whole deck through the key card being High Tide. High Tide says until the end of your turn all your islands produce an additional blue. So if you tap an island after resolving 1 High Tide, it produces 2 blue. If you play 2 High Tides, that island now produces 3 blue, 4 High Tides, 4 blue. So your islands start turning into big mana spells. What you then do is you're going to be playing arcane spells like Reach the Mist, and then you're going to be playing cards like where is it? Where is my blue untapper? Right here. So Ideas Unbound. Draw 3 cards, discard 3 cards at the end of turn. And then also you're going to be playing cards like Psychic Puppetry. So Psychic Puppetry says untap or tap target permanent, and you can splice onto Arcane for 1 blue. So as you play this Arcane, as you play an Arcane spell, you may reveal this card from your hand, pay the splice cost, and play it. So if you play something like where is it? Or Reach Through the Mist, you can Reach Through the Mist for 1 blue and draw a card, and then you pay an additional cost to even just play the where is it, the Psychic Puppetry, but revealing the Psychic Puppetry doesn't actually get rid of it from your hand. All it does is add the effect onto the card. So what you can then do is kind of churn through a bunch of these draw effects that untap your islands, draw more cards, find your cards. Like you just draw through your whole deck and untap all your lands over and over and over again, which is the frustrating part of what they were saying of watching your opponent do the same thing over and over again. And then once you've generated a critical mass of cards, you can then cast Stream of Thought, replicate it a bunch of times, and target player puts the top 4 cards of the library into the graveyard, so mill them out. You can even Stream of Thought yourself. Once your deck's getting low, to be able to generate more mana, you can then Stream of Thought yourself to return a bunch of copies of cards back in your deck, a bunch of untappers and a bunch of draw cards, to be able to like draw through, untap your lands again, and do that over and again. First Stream of Thought can shuffle back in the other copy of Stream of Thought that's in your graveyard. You do stuff like that, and you win through mill. Ultimately, in the main board, you're going to notice there is no counter magic. This deck does not interact with you, right? It does not interact with you in any way, shape, or form. The only interaction piece in the main board, largely the only interaction piece most of the time, is going to be the singular copy of Giga Joust. And sometimes, yeah, okay, I shouldn't be completely facetious here. They do have Muddle to make sure sometimes in the main board, but largely it's Giga Joust. Giga Joust taps target permanent. So you can tap down an opponent's lands and their ability to interact. You can do that on their instep to just be able to get out either a counterspell from their hand, or again, just tap down their board, and then you untap and you just go off from there. First of all, play counter magic. This deck does not work without High Tide. Okay, if you are able to counter the first High Tide, generally you can get there. If you can even then counter the second High Tide, the deck probably just falls flat on its face right there. The deck probably cannot even win from there. Both copies of High Tide are now in the graveyard. Even if they cast something like a Stream of Thought, they then have to mill 4 cards, and then they shuffle them back in, and then they have to refine those cards, those copies of High Tide, alongside the other ones. So countering the High Tide, so the fact that, again, blue decks are at the top of the meta, you're playing a Prodigal Sorcerer Brew, you are playing counter spells, you can play your Spell Pierces, you can play your, counter target instant spell, counter target sorcery spell, whatever it is. Like, notably, High Tide is an instant, so counter target instant spell is going to be great. So playing your counter spells is going to be great. If you're playing something like a red brew, I should say, you could play something like Pyroblast or Red Elemental Blast to be able to counter almost anything. Like, let's say they play High Tide. They play High Tide, they have 1 blue, they go to tap that island and tap for 2 blue to be able to untap something, counter that on tapper, now they're done. Right? If you can counter key spells in this deck at key moments, you can interact with them really early and really mess them up, especially in the main board scenario. Now, there is some level of like graveyard interaction here when it comes to like High Tide. Like you have Stream of Thought reshuffling things back in. I wouldn't really rely on that. I wouldn't be bringing in like Nile spell bombs and stuff like that. Like if you have like individual point removal in graveyard, like maybe, right? Like if you can get rid of like High Tides and stuff like that, like maybe you can do that. There is stuff like that you could do. Now, if you are milling your opponent and you are graveyard hate, that's something, right? Like if you're playing something like a Petitioner's Mill deck, a Simic Petitioner's Mill deck, and you mill your opponent out and you had some level of graveyard hate, just mill them out from there. That's possible. That deck doesn't like really play graveyard hate like that, but I'm saying it's a possibility. So really what you're doing in terms of blue, you're countering their stuff. In red, you could be playing Hydroblast, and if you're playing red, you're aggroing your opponent out, you're creating a clock anyway. Your opponent's, OP said their opponent like did this on turn 5. This deck, the earliest it can go off on is turn 3, and it needs the nuts. More consistently, it's going off on turn 4. So turn 5 is really, really late for this deck. You had a lot of time to set up interaction packages, and it seems like you just lack the knowledge of how to interact with this deck. Now, when it comes to black decks, you are playing probably some level of duresses, some level of interaction, some level of hand disruption there. You're playing black, you probably have some graveyard hate as well. So alongside the duresses and the graveyard hate, you were looking at duresses to interrupt them, and then you were playing the long game alongside your other color, whether it be black green or black blue or something like that, black red even. You have the package to be able to win the game. Black is there to help accentuate that, play those duresses, take the untapper out, take the high tide out, all that stuff. Like, they're going to be playing preordains and brainstorms, trying to be able to find their islands and their high tides. You need to make sure once they have that, you're able to disrupt them from there. When it comes to green, you don't really have a lot of answers when it comes to mono green. That's the thing though. Pauper doesn't really play mono green. Mono green is a very uncommon deck. You are probably playing some level of, some level of graveyard hate, which is the only thing you can bring in. But when it comes to top tiers, green is playing alongside other colors. Green is playing alongside red when it comes to mono, like the ramp package or something like land destruction, which, by the way, really powerful here. In a deck that really cares about its islands and doesn't really play a lot of interaction, playing something like Thermokarst seems really damn good. So play green, red ramp or something like that. If you're playing green and blue, not very common. You could be playing the mill deck. If you're playing green and black, you are playing probably some type of combo deck when it comes to it, right? Like, you're probably playing something like mid-range and Jund Wildfire, Spy combo. Not a very familiar, simple color playing. Even in something like Bogles that plays like white and stuff, like, you have the ability to play into different colors simply because Bogles can have cards that generate different colors. So you're going to be able to have other answers. Tron can do that as well. Again, Elves generally, like, you know how Elves does it as mono green? It just has a faster clock. It just says, I'm going to be faster. And yes, it has some level of interaction. Like, you can play like hand disruption spells in like Mesmeric Fiend. But generally speaking, once it disrupts you once, it's just going to say, I'm faster. Right? And that's generally what a lot of decks can do. So I think what you were missing when it comes to beating high tide combo is you just lacked the knowledge as to what the combo was and when to interact. And also, you were playing a brew that had the options, but potentially you just, again, didn't have that knowledge, so you didn't know to pack said options. So high tide, again, very frustrating to play against. It can still win. You can still sometimes win through interaction, but generally speaking, the top decks in the format right now are really good at answering high tide combo. High tide combo just tries to take advantage of the least interactive decks, like whether it be Spy, whether it be Burn, whether it be Elves, like decks that do have a faster clock, but sometimes they do stumble. Like, high tide will take advantage of that, right? And they're all over the leagues, they're all over the format when it comes to general playability. When it comes to Cycle Storm, this is the one that I kind of like believe the least, because it sounds like, especially as that person responded, like the high tide player like had the absolute nuts. Like, there is, as I mentioned, as a high tide player, winning on turn 2, that's the dream. That's the dream. Like, I don't even think a win on turn 1 is technically possible, but the percentage of that is like so low. Like, again, technically possible, but like so low. Like, you don't even understand the things that have to go right. Like, a win on turn 2 is really surprising. Win on turn 3, like it's possible. It's probably when you're starting to look to like try and win. Turn 4, very likely, right? Like, that's turn 3, turn 4 is likely when you're looking for it. The way Cycle Storm works, okay, is you're playing a bunch of cycling creatures, right? The key ones that I'm going to point out are Dranith Healer and Dranith Stinger, which ends up being your win condition, right? You're cycling these cards and drawing cards, and you're filling up your graveyard. What you then do is you play something like Songs of the Damned or Dark Ritual, right? And notice how the package, the engine I was talking about, this is a Lotus Petal Dark Ritual package deck. This is a combo deck. You play Songs of the Damned, add mana equal to your number of creatures in your mana pool or in your graveyard. You've been putting Street Rates in there, Monstrance, Carapads, Dranith Stingers. You've been filling up your graveyard. And then cast Songs of the Damned. With that mana, and by casting spells like Lotus Petal, Dark Ritual, Songs of the Damned, all on your one turn, cycling notably does not add to your storm count. It's not casting a card, you're using an ability. So casting cards like Lotus Petal, Songs of the Damned, Dark Ritual, you're going to generate a storm count, and you're going to cast Reaping the Graves. Reaping the Graves then says return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, storm. So each individual copy of Reaping Graves will return a different creature. You'll then return those creatures to your hand, and you will cycle over and over again with the mana that you generated off something like Songs of the Damned. You will find more rituals. You will cast them again. You'll hopefully find more Songs of the more of those. You'll return them through something like Repository Scab or like other tutor spells to be able to find more copies and keep going. Eventually, what you will do is you will Reaping the Graves with a critical mass of mana to then return Dragonite Stinger to your hand, and you will use a combination of either Lotus Petals or Blood Celebrant to be able to change your mana into red mana to cast the Dragonite Stinger. And then with Dragonite Stinger on the battlefield, it says whenever you cycle another card, Dragonite Stinger deals 1 damage to each opponent. You then cycle through your cards all over again. And what's great about this deck is it does have a level of resiliency. Once you get out Dragonite Stinger, you can win in response to removal. Because if you have a critical mass of mana and you cast Dragonite Stinger, it resolves, you cycle your first card, your opponent then looks to remove the Dragonite Stinger. You can then cycle and keep going. But then obviously at some point you will probably need to cast another Reaping the Graves. The Dragonite Stinger dies, but then the Stinger dies, you have more mana, you just cast Reaping the Graves again. You return, you keep going. You can notice how clearly there are key interaction points in this deck. First of all, in response to the Songs of the Damned, you can have Graveyard Hate. If you have a Nihil Spellbomb, if you have a Relic of Progenitus, if you have Fairy Macabre, whatever it is, Fairy Macabre, yeah, even Fairy Macabre. Honestly, Fairy Macabre even can work in a lot of ways. You can interact with their graveyard. In response to Reaping the Graves, by the way, which is a sorcery, right? They can't even respond to your Songs of the Damned with the Reaping the Graves. Like, this is a sorcery. Exile their graveyard. So again, you're probably missing Graveyard Hate. Or in this case, where they actually did mention they did win in game 2 through that Graveyard Hate, I feel like you just hit it at the wrong time, or they just had the nuts, which doesn't mean anything. Everyone is allowed to have the nuts. They can have the crazy draw. That doesn't mean, like, I think OP is doing a bad job of understanding statistics, right? Like, that's not going to happen every single game. Secondly, when it comes to interaction, this deck very clearly, as I mentioned, needs a critical mass of key cards to actually get about it. Go about winning. It needs rituals. It needs Songs of the Damned. It needs Reaping the Graves. It even needs cycling cards. It needs lands to be able to cast them. This deck is playing 11 lands alongside 4 Lotus Petals. Like, it needs a critical mass of cards to even get there. So playing something like Land Destruction, obviously very viable in that sense, but if they're limited on their mana, countering key cards is also going to be really powerful. Spell Pierces, your counter spells, counter target instant spell, Dark Ritual and instant, Songs of the Damned and instant. Like, countering these cards are going to be important. So Graveyard Hate. Every deck in Pauper got Graveyard Hate in the main board and the sideboard. Every deck in Pauper. You got 3 to 4 pieces of Graveyard Hate in your sideboard. Every single deck. So again, you had him there in game 2. You probably just popped it at the wrong time, or opponent had the nuts. If opponent went off on turn 2, I'm inclined to believe you popped it at the wrong time. And then you said they won through counter magic. When we're missing so many parts of the story, when did you counter? Did you counter the Cabal? The Cabal ritual? Did you counter the Songs of the Damned, the Dark Ritual? Did you counter? And what did you counter? Did you counter the Dark Ritual and then they just cast songs after? That's your mistake. That's your lack of knowledge. You should have counted the Songs of the Damned, right? Again, so many parts of this complaint here just kind of highlights A, the opponent either had the nuts, or B, you lacked the options and you didn't build your deck right, either with the engine playing with the brew or with enough cards in your sideboard like a traditional Pauper deck would do, or C, you just used all those options at the wrong time. You had your answers, you had some level of deck knowledge, but you just didn't have the complete knowledge to be able to answer the right card at the right time. And so with all that in mind, just highlighting the fact that Pauper, generally speaking, every deck in Pauper has the ability to answer every other deck. Generally speaking, Pauper is a very diverse format with a lot of interaction and a lot of cool engines and bases for different brews, and that can lead to different parts of innovation. Pauper is a great format, but if you don't have the time invested to understand different interactions and learn it at a deep level, you are going to stumble in some places, and I do too. You see it in my gameplay. I misplay all the time. But with my general knowledge, I can at least speak this out and have an idea about what I want to do. I may miss that at that time, but I think what OP is doing here is being purposely ignorant of some things, right? Especially this last statement here. What is the counterplay against these win on the stack deck? I don't know what win on the stack means. Like, every deck puts a win on the stack. I don't know what that means, right? Like, even a deck that wins through combat, that's on the stack. You can answer in attack phase, in their attack phase, in their defense phase. They even put Craterhoof Behemoth on the stack. Every deck is a win on the stack deck. I don't know what that means. If this is the meta, I'm never going to play this format. You're just whining on Reddit. You're just complaining on Reddit. This immediately tells me you salted off, right? You didn't think about what's going on here. You came back to this game after 20 years. it seems like you lack a little bit of perspective here. I hope this opponent is, I hope OP's not playing Commander, because Lord knows they'd be pissed off. They'd be pissed off to all heck if they even played a single game of Commander. The amount of bull crap happening in an average game of Commander, it would fry their minds, right? And that statement along with the final one, this was the most boring way I've ever spent my night off. I'd rather have stayed home and done yard work. Please help. Okay, so that I think is a fair statement. If you go 0-2 drop in any FNM, you go for Modern, Legacy, Standard, whatever. If you just get VV'd in Standard, you get Mono Red in Pioneer, you get Boros energied by, you know, a bunch of friggin' cat tokens, you get, you know, Oops All Spelled in Legacy, like everyone's going to be frustrated. There are decks that frustrate everybody in each format that have nut draws that are nearly uninteractable. You just, it's hard. Every deck has a nut play. Every combo deck has those crazy openers. But that does not mean that we need to completely salt off and understand that, like, you know, I'd rather have stayed home and done yard work. What about a friend that, you know, a friend suggested Pauper? Who's that friend? Do they play Pauper too? Why don't you go speak to them and ask them, like, hey, what's going on with the rest of the format? Like, is this actually the format? Go look up like other decks, right? Like, how did you get into this format? There's a lot of problems with what's going on here. And you know what? Like, that could be a lack of information. They're just coming back in this game after 20 years. They may not have the resources. Maybe they watched a video and thought it was like cool again. They wanted to try a hobby again. But, you know, having rather stayed home and done yard work, I feel like that's like a part of a bigger problem. Like, yes, you know, this is just a small rant on the side. And I promise I don't want to just extend video time with this. But, like, you know, going to play Magic and learning these things in Magic, learning this deeper level is part of that idea of enjoying your hobby again. Back when you had time as a kid, as a teenager, growing up, when you had time to learn builds in games, you played your online games, you learned about the maximal way to play something, you learned about the cool tech in your, even in your single player game, right? Like the cool area that no one else found at the school, but you did. You found that secret area, you found that secret weapon, like stuff like that required time. It required investment. And a lot of people don't have that now. But you also do, like you said, you would rather go home and have done yard work, right? So there are times where you say you can spend time playing a hobby and not doing the yard work. You can do the yard work later. So there are times where you can actually spend doing things that you could supposedly enjoy and spending time to enjoy them. I think what's happening is a lot of people do not get that immediate gratification anymore, and they don't go to learn something. They get frustrated by something and they don't want to take a larger sample size. Before, in the old times, we didn't have options. We played one game, we played two games, whatever. We didn't have options. You just had to learn. This was your environment. But now with so many options, so many things to do, and so many people telling you it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. No, it's not. You know, like it's that whole idea of like how people don't want to spend time like being a friend. You know, it takes a village to raise someone, but no one wants to be a villager. In a similar vein, it takes time to learn something and enjoy something and have it be a hobby. Just like how you spent time doing that yard work and doing it well, there's many other things you'd rather be doing than yard work. I doubt that you would rather be doing yard work than actually playing Magic. You're just pissed off. So take the time to learn. Take the time, you know, on some of those other things, you know, work with your partner, work with your roommates, work with whoever, your parents or whoever, to find the time to be able to do this. On average, like you are finding time to play your hobby. On average, I feel like your life is in a better situation on average if you're able to spend time learning and playing Magic, and you have the privilege of doing yard work, right? That you have, whether it's your own place or something like that, you have the privilege of doing that. There's a lot of things that are working in your favor. And I think if we just rewire the way we think, we could actually enjoy the game of Magic instead of salting off on a Reddit post. But regardless, highlighting how Pauper has many different options. There are many different ways to answer different decks, kind of highlighting those in those two examples, but also ultimately, like, I think we need to take a good analysis of what's going on in our own lives, really break down how we're feeling about Magic and our hobbies in general, and how we're able to kind of rewire and spend better time with these hobbies, and how we need a critical mass of things. And many bad stories and bad beat stories that we also have good stories. And these all add up to the summation of our hobby and the enjoyment and of our Magic career. So I don't want to ramble on too long. Let me know what you think about the Pauper format. Let me know how you're feeling about answering these two decks, if I'm missing anything in particular, or if I'm off basis completely. Regardless, Pauper is a great format. How about we just end it off there?